We now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Blackwell. Let me say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but never good night, and never, ever goodbye. I hate goodbyes. My name is Reverend Nathaniel W Martin. I'm the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in the city of Los Angeles. I welcome you to another offering that we call It's Time. It's time for justice. Yes, that includes environmental justice. It must include medical healthcare justice. And yes, that always leads to economic justice. And economic justice, in my opinion, must always lead down to the door of the depository bank of reparations. For this nation must make reparation, must make whole, must make restitution. What was the basic meaning of the word reparation is to repair something that has been unnecessarily broken. And in the case of the wealth accumulation of the black portion of the society, who are the descendants of the slaves, or the American descendants of slaves, more correctly articulated, we certainly are long overdue. We're not talking about victimization. We're talking about getting paid. I disagree with those slick congressmen who tried to say that Social Security is a federal benefit. They're not benefiting us. Social Security is what they owe us. You paid that money into that Social Security fund, and they used the interest borrowed off of that fund to do everything that they wanted to do. And now that you have survived past 65, they want to talk about they're giving you a benefit. You're giving me a benefit. You're giving me what I paid you. You're upholding your end of the social contract. Says if I pay into it, then I'll get that I paid into it back out of it in a monthly stipend, as it were. Don't fall for the okie doke that Social Security is welfare. There's no welfare involved. You paid that money in, and now that you have survived long enough to retire, you got a right now to tell the government to pay that money back. And since they don't want to give it back all to you in one lump sum, they give it back to you as they want in a monthly allocation. Another word that in the insurance industry that they use for that type of a payment, but it escapes my mind right at the second. I want to read for you the reparations scripture in the Bible, and we're going to be moving into other areas of the Bible that likewise speak about justice as opposed to injustice, for looking out for the least of us as opposed to looking out for the richest and the most wealthy of us. But this scripture here in Deuteronomy will suffice to begin our treatise. It says in the 15th chapter of Deuteronomy, picking up our reading at verse number 12. Some of you heard me read it week in and week out, and I continue to read it because it's very cogent, very instructive. If thy brother, an Hebrew man or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him or her go free from thee. And when thou sendest them out free from thee, thou shalt not let them go away empty. In other words, you don't send them out of there broke and busted, nowhere to turn, nowhere to go. It says instead, thou shalt furnish him or her liberally. Oh, how the conservatives hate the word liberal. Liberally out of thy flock. That means you got sheep, you got goats, you got dromedaries, you got camels, all of that type of livestock, you got to share some of that with those people who have worked with you in those 5 or 7 years to make that up. Bless them out of thy flock, and bless them out of thy floor. That means you're going to give them meat, then you're going to give them bread. That's what wheat and barley and corn and all the other manifestations of agriculture amount to. And then out of thy wine press. I wonder why God tells him to give him some wine. But he does say so. Out of thy wine press. Because wine in those days was not only just to ease one's mind, but it was also medicinal. Not like the stuff we drink today. Of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto them. Now, my friends, that's very clear that God does not condone poverty, even though Jesus said the poor you have always with you. But God had a way that we were to address poverty, a way that we were to take care of the less fortunate, of the poor. I think I used the word protokos, which is a word, which is a Greek word that Dr. William Barber used to describe people who were not born poor, but who were made poor. And any number of examples would suffice to show you that, or to demonstrate that. You working at Bethlehem Steel, and your father worked at Bethlehem Steel, and your granddaddy worked at Bethlehem Steel, and your family's working at Bethlehem Steel, and your dependence for a paycheck is on Bethlehem Steel, and all of a sudden Bethlehem Steel closed, shut down. It's get to the gate, and they said, no more. Now they have made you what you were not before. They've taken away your means of support. They've taken away your paycheck. They've taken away your economy. They've undermined your financial ability to meet your financial obligation, because now your house note is going to be dependent on how much money have you been able to save. And if you, like most people, been living from pillar to post, paycheck to paycheck, you're already in trouble. And when you're poor and you haven't had anything in the first place, you always have a tendency to go out and splurge, buy things you ought not to buy a car you can't afford, or you can afford it, but you shouldn't have bought it, should have bought something less. And same with the gas. Point is that when America closes up its factories and moves them overseas, they make a new generation of a class of poor people. When America depresses wages that it pays to the working poor, and keep in mind that in the Bible there was only two classes of people. We got what you call middle class and something else, but the Bible only recognized poor folks and rich folks. And either you had money, your money's working for you, or you had no money and you were working for your money. And if you were working for your money, you poor. If your money's working for you, then you have an opportunity. But of course, as Professor Derek Hamilton and Professors William Darity and Professor Tricia Rose and a whole ilk of sociologists and economists have pointed out to us that you need what the black man has very small opportunity to amass, and that is wealth or inheritance that one can pass on to others, which is what one of the detriments of working 250 years of unrequited toil. That's illegal. That was legal, sanctioned slavery. What it did to us, and followed up by the 100 years of redlining in the home industry, and of course the further marginalization that followed, where your health care, your education, and the like, all of those things have worked against the accumulation of wealth. Very few of us have much to pass on to our children. We have very little to pass on to our grandchildren. Case in point, Mr. Hilton. Mr. Hilton had the Hilton hotels and the Hilton industry. When he died, he left his children very, very well fixed. Not only his children, but his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, his great-great-great-grandchildren. Paris Hilton, she doesn't hit a lick at a snake. She has inherited wealth. She don't need no job. She ain't got to have no income. She has wealth. Wealth is something that you did not work for, that is passed on to you, that you in turn are able to use to continue to accumulate more wealth, and that way you can pass that on. Look at the barons of industry. I think about Dick Cheney. I use him because he was vice president of the United States, and he urged and he promoted, and he did everything he could to get the war in Iraq started. Why? Because he was the president, or he had been the president or chairman of a company that dealt in oil field products and oil-related services, and that had further diversified, and it was now able to build camps and all of these types of places where soldiers would have their encampments. And he was able, after urging and causing the brouhaha, or the trouble that we caused the people in Iraq. We never found any weapons of mass destruction because there were never any weapons of mass destruction there. But we knew that there had been weapons of mass destruction because we had the receipts, because we sold him, meaning Saddam Hussein, the weapons that we had him use against the Iranians in the Iran-Iraq conflict. People don't keep a scorecard. But my point is that having urged the conflict as a politician and as a citizen of the United States, then he had his company, Halliburton, receive no bid government contracts, no other company that could have done it cheaper, certainly would have done it better, wasn't able to bid on the rebuilding of Iraq, so that he urged the destruction and the bombing of most of the infrastructure of Iraq. Then he rushed in with his company to do the rebuilding and to charge the government exorbitant and inflated costs and fees for those services that he had not only urged and promoted and insisted on and encouraged. You see how that works? But then look how much wealth he was continually able to accrue, while he's piled up wealth for generations of his families yet unborn. They have plenty of finance. They have wealth. Although this is ill-gotten gain, and it's not really a good, positive moral illustration, but it serves to illustrate the point that if you have wealth that or inheritance from your family, from whatever source, then you have a leg up on everybody that's merely working on a job. And that's the whole point, because your income is not going to be sufficient in the long haul. They've already discovered the scandal in the schools that you have to pay in order to attend. They used to call them, when I was a kid, you call them correspondence school. You pay them to go to school. But then it became big business. And it's found out within the latter part of the last century and on up to now that the schools like Trump University and the like, Capella University, University of Phoenix, and all like that, that what they were doing was appealing to black women who were mothers who were now unemployed or laid off, and they needed to get back in the workforce, and they know that in order to get a good job, they needed a degree in some field, and they were able to peel off, make an appealing a presentation to a lot of young black women who were new mothers, single mothers for the most part, and to get them to enroll in their schools. Now, keep in mind that the powers that be, those who handle those loans in the government and in those so-called private schools, knew for a fact that the student loan default rate was very high among black women. A lot of folks started those schools, but then couldn't finish the schools and couldn't pay the loan. Well, the schools like University of Phoenix and the like, that's what they were looking for, because they could then go to the United States government, and the government would pay them the total amount of your school fund. And then the government would, of course, put that entire unpaid student loan against your credit record. And when you go to get a job, that student loan would come up. When you go to buy a house, that student loan debt would come up. You go to buy a car, that student loan debt would come up. And now, in the 90s under Bill Clinton, and then right up after that under George Bush, and especially under George Bush the Jr., they further cemented the ability of the government to recover the unpaid student loan debt from you, because you could not even go to bankruptcy and get rid of that student loan. You were stuck with that student loan. That student loan followed you down into the grave. And that adversely affects black people, especially black women who want to be upwardly mobile. You want to be somebody, you want to accomplish something, you want to have something, and you got this debt hanging over your head, along with the other debt, the unpaid student loan. And so it was an elaborate, long-range scandal to put the burden of repayment on top of the other burdens that poor black women bear, that burden of an unpaid student loan debt that you had to satisfy, because it would cripple you. It wouldn't paralyze you, but it would certainly cripple you at every stage of your life. And keep in mind, Social Security said you only have about 35 good working years. And after that, because of industrial accidents and carpal tunnel syndrome and all of that, the force of life diminishes your working ability. You can't do now what you did when you were in your 20s, for example. So all of those, that, of course, as I said, in the education of black people, of something to get a leg up, and come to find out that not only was it not a leg up, but that we paid more to go to those school-for-profit schools than if we had attended the historically black colleges or the other state-run universities or the community colleges that the for-profit schools and for-profit colleges were really a scandal. It was a trap, and because they, like I said, they knew from the jump street that many students would not be able to repay that loan. Not only that, they knew they would not be able to finish the schooling. And then on top of that, if you get a degree from some of these profit motivated schools, commercial schools, and then you go in for an interview and you show them, the interviewer, your transcript from some of these colleges. They place very little value on these degrees and certificates that you get from these types of schools. If you get in other words, if you got a degree from Harvard, come on in. But if you got a degree from, say, Capella or from University of Phoenix or some of these other that are selling their degrees, there's a question mark beside those types of degrees, certificates, and associate arts things from those types of institutions. You need to take that into consideration. The big schools, the established schools are still your best bet if you're going to continue in the job market, because the degree from Harvard is still there. A degree from Trump University is gone. A whole lot of these other schools that were established to make money, to train you, to do that accelerated learning academies and all like that, they're gone. They're fly-by-nights. And what is your degree worth in that regard? And a lot of well-meaning black women, men and women for that matter, wound up having to go back and go into a regular school after they had paid for this other mess, and to take those courses again, and then try to get the courses that they really needed in order to advance at their jobs. So yes, it was a trap, and but it was a trap that they knew that we were susceptible to fall in because of our historic economic disadvantaged condition here, brought about by the 250 years of slavery, and then brought about by the public-private partnership between the real estate brokers, between the mortgage bankers, and between the home builders. It was a trap. It was a travesty. In other words, the people who had historically discriminated against you, when the government said, well, now y'all stop that. And in, say, around 1968, when the Federal Housing Administration, under the Lyndon Baines Johnson administration, suddenly became the Fair Housing Administration. Yes, fair, but for who? You see, but the same players were still in charge. They said, well, they got to do right now. You see, and they went from making money off you by excluding you to making money off you by what? Including you. But like the lady Miss Janice Johnson or Mr. Clyde Ross, or so many other thousands of our people found themselves stuck with land installment contracts. I mean, you were just paying and paying, but you got no principal, you got no, in other words, you didn't accumulate any value in the equity. Thank you. In the house and the like. You were just paying and paying and paying. And I was surprised to find out that in 2010, or rather in the crash that began in, say, 2007, that our people were the most victimized group of these substandard loans, subprime, they call them, subprime rate loans, where you were just paying in the property, but you were never going to own it. I had known for a long time that there was a scandal, a scheme going among the real estate brokers that they would put a black family in a house, but knowing that in 7 years that black family, thank you, sir, would be out of that house. 7 years in and 7 years out, and they got that means the real estate mortgage company got the house back, plus they got all the down payment you put in there, plus they got all the notes that you put in there, plus they got all of the improvements that you may have made on their property. Excuse me. That you were unable to hold on to. And yes, the deck has been stacked against us from Jump Street. And so for that reason and many more, examples can be compounded. But the model was set in place in slavery. So if you came out of slavery with nothing, you had no job, you had no money, you had no credit, you had nowhere to stay, and you had no support group financially to support you, then quite naturally you were open to economic exploitation, as Malcolm X so famously pointed out to us. So you became victim of economic exploitation because you had to take whatever was offered to you because you were grasping at straw. You didn't have nothing. Now the establishment hands you something to hold on to, even though that's only a straw. Only they give you a life preserver, but they don't bring you to dry land and establish you. No, so now you grasping at straws. And it's like a person who knows that they're being underpaid, but they are getting a paycheck every week or every 2 weeks, and they're able to bring it home, and even though it's only able to buy enough gas or maybe to pay a note, but their self-esteem forces them to stay with that job, even though the man is working them harder and paying them less money. It is really just another form of slavery, because when you get where you can't work, they don't want you. And that is the brutality of the capitalistic system under which we all live. Yes, they went from excluding you and making money to including you and continuing to make money. As one person said, that a person in the White housing is worth more precisely because it is not black housing. And in other words, we were set up to fail because the real estate brokers used, just like the school for profit people, they went out and found vulnerable, upwardly mobile black people, a lot of them women, who wanted to have something, and they sold them these houses knowing in their mind that they're not going to be able to hold on to the house. And so that would reinforce the stereotypes that prevail in the industry and still prevail in the industry. In other words, when a house appraiser comes to appraise a White House, it always gets a very positive, high appraisal. But when that same white appraiser comes to appraise a black house, a house owned by a black person, it gets an inherently punitive appraisal. Why? Because the fix is in. A house owned by a black person is inherently considered worth less than the same house owned by a white person. And that's been the scandal in the industry from then until now. Why? Because racial discrimination is still good for business. And that is what we are battling against. So as I wrap up my harangue, I haven't got very far, but I am dealing with black history, and this is a part of our history too. It's not because you didn't work hard, it's not because you didn't get the education, it's not because you didn't get the degree, but it's because it was set up to fail from the jump street. All right, and so again, as I wrap up here on this on the 31st of January, knowing that February starts tomorrow, Black History Month. Again, I tell you, you got to start your own business. You got to start your own revenue stream. You got to find what you're good at that you can make money at to sustain yourself. Because if you're working on a job and the CEO is making $29 million, but they only want to pay you kibbles and bits, my advice to you, as I have always said and continue to say, look toward the future, start your own business, because if they don't want to pay you, don't work for them. Thank you, Doc. We out.
My good day